Kentucky family is demanding answers today in the death of a frontline healthcare worker who was killed during a police raid 2 months ago today. Breonna Taylor's family is suing 3 Louisville police officers after the 26-year-old woman was shot and killed in her apartment. Now, officials say this incident back in March was tied to a drug investigation where police were searching for someone else. As our national correspondent Jerika Duncan reports, Taylor's mother claims gross negligence took her daughter's life.
Breonna loved life, and she loved to help people, and she loved a family. She didn't deserve what they did to her.
Tamika Palmer is Breonna Taylor's mother. The 26-year-old was an EMT working in emergency rooms at 2 hospitals and helping respond to the coronavirus outbreak.
I was more concerned with her washing her hands than dying at home.
But just after midnight on March 13th, police shot Taylor at least 8 times, killing her in the apartment she shared with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker.
Officers knocked on the door several times and announced their presence as police who were there with a search warrant. The officers forced entry into the exterior door and were immediately met by gunfire.
Louisville Metro Police say the officers were part of a narcotics investigation and opened fire after Walker shot first. They're now on administrative reassignment pending the results of an internal investigation. The lawsuit against the officers claims the suspect they were searching for was already in custody. Taylor's family alleges the officers wearing plain clothes did not identify themselves and that Walker, a registered gun owner, was shooting at men he believed were breaking in. Walker is now charged with first-degree assault and attempted murder of a police officer.
They thought they were being burglarized. Does the Second Amendment not apply to African Americans?
Attorney Ben Crump joined Breonna Taylor's case this week. He is also representing the family of Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot dead in February while on a run in his Georgia neighborhood.
This was a completely unnecessary and justifiable killing of an innocent woman.
For CBS This Morning, Jerika Duncan.
Welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Wednesday, June the 3rd, 2020. As you just heard, the report from CBS News this morning, dated May the 13th. The topic, when I return, Breonna Taylor.
Breonna loved life, and she loved to help people, and she loved a family. She didn't deserve what they did to her.
No, she didn't. Breonna Taylor should still be with us on this very day, and for many, many, many more days to come. Breonna Taylor was just 26 years old. She was an emergency medical technician, EMT, and she was also an emergency room technician. As you heard in the report that I played before the break, she had been helping patients. She had been doing her very best to help patients who had the coronavirus at 2 different hospitals. That was the job of Breonna Taylor. And on March the 13th, 2020, in Louisville, Kentucky, while she slept, she was shot to death by police who were plainclothed, who did not identify themselves as police, and who broke in to her
Breonna loved life, and she loved to help people, and she loved a family. She didn't deserve what they did to her.
That was the voice of the mother of Breonna Taylor. And I totally agree. Of course, Breonna Taylor did not deserve what happened to her. Tamika Palmer is the mother, and she is the person you just heard speaking about her daughter, 26 years of age, on March the 13th of this year, 2020, in Louisville. Breonna Taylor was sleeping. She was shot to death by police who did not identify themselves as police, who were plainclothed, who broke in the door of the house. And what these 3 cops did is shoot her 8 times while she slept in her own bed. Her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, using self-defense. A man's home is his castle, the castle doctrine, giving him the right to defend his home. And he shot at one of the officers and was charged with attempted murder. Those charges have since been dropped by prosecutors. Breonna Taylor did not deserve to be shot. Breonna Taylor did not pose any threat at all. Breonna Taylor was sleeping. This is a cowardly act. This is a murderous act. This is a lynching of a black woman, Breonna Taylor. 26 years old. She was an EMT, emergency medical technician. She was also an emergency room technician. She had been helping patients, as you heard in the report that I played to start this episode. Helping patients who had coronavirus. She was doing that at 2 different hospitals. She had really big visions ahead of her. She had her life all mapped out. And even if she never had big dreams or big visions or her life mapped out or was ever an EMT or an ERT, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the person who was murdered was or was going to be. The point is that it gives police no right at all, no right to assassinate somebody. No right whatsoever. The police defense is that they say they were looking for a quote-unquote suspect who had reportedly been selling drugs. Never mind the fact that the house where these drugs were being sold was so far away that it could have just as well have been in a different area code, let alone a different zip code from where Breonna Taylor lived. Turns out that this so-called suspect that they were looking for had already been in police custody. Could someone have done a quick check? Could someone have thought to have done a quick look at the records? Police have all kinds of technology. They have dashboards in their vehicles. They have surveillance They have intelligence. They have all kinds of information at their disposal, at their fingertips. Did someone do a check? I don't know whether they did. I don't know whether they did not. But I do know, and the world knows, that this so-called suspect that they were looking for was already in police custody. The police used a no-knock warrant, which means that you as a police officer are not required to identify yourself. You can just burst into someone's house. You can burst into someone's apartment. You can burst in unannounced. The idea being, oh, it's such a dangerous situation that to announce yourself would be inviting a fatality or a severe risk of death. That is the concept of the no-knock warrant, which, by the way, is being suspended now in Kentucky. And in Little Rock, Arkansas, that no-knock warrant has been suspended. Even Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, who is the same Rand Paul that has held up anti-lynching legislation in the Senate, says that no-knock warrants should be outlawed. What's interesting about this murder case, because that's exactly what it is, for these three cops, all of them white male cops who have now been put on basically desk duty, administrative assignment, as you heard in that report. What's interesting is about all of these police is that you have a person who's a police spokesman, and you may have heard him saying that the police entered and announced themselves. They announced who they were and they entered. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In fact, that is a lie. They did not announce themselves. According to Kenneth Walker, they just burst into his home, which prompted him to get his gun, which is why he had his gun. He was legally licensed to have a gun. So naturally, when someone bursts into your house at 1 a.m., which is the time that these three cops did so, and bursts in without identifying themselves as police, and they are plain clothed, obviously any rational thinking person would actually say to themselves, my goodness, I'm being robbed. My life is at risk, and I need to defend myself, which is exactly what Kenneth Walker did. Kenneth Walker shot one of the cops in the leg, and he was initially charged with attempted murder, and he has had all charges against him dropped. But the key thing here to take away is that to this day, none of these three cops have been arrested. And to the best of my knowledge, none of them have been fired either. It has been 2.5 months. It has been almost 3 months. And to this very day, there has neither been a single arrest or a firing of these three cops who murdered Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor is somebody who is just the latest in a series of black women who have been murdered by police. Sandra Bland, Charlena Lyles, Tatiana Jefferson. I can go on and on and on. Rakia Boyd. You could fill a dictionary with the names of black men and women and black boys and girls who have been killed over the last 10 years by police across the United States of America. You literally could fill a dictionary. And I'm not talking about a small dictionary either. Breonna Taylor should still be with us. And the media should have covered this story from the start. And I'm talking the national media. I'm sure that the local media in Louisville has been covering Breonna Taylor and the execution of Breonna Taylor. How do you justify? There's no justification. I'm not even going to pose that question to you. You are sleeping. And all of a sudden, you are shot 8 times. You never, ever wake up again. That's what happened to Breonna Taylor. She slept peacefully, and yet her life was ended, and ended so violently. If ever there was a definition of a most violent sleep, the execution of Breonna Taylor is it.
This morning, the family of a Kentucky woman shot and killed by police is demanding answers, filing a wrongful death lawsuit against 3 officers. Breonna Taylor's family claiming officers blindly fired more than 20 shots into her apartment 2 months ago. On March 13th, 3 officers entered Taylor's apartment while she and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, were sleeping. The officers were executing a search warrant as part of a drug investigation. Police claim Taylor's ex-boyfriend was shipping drugs to her apartment to avoid detection.
This is not a woman who would sacrifice her life and her family morals and values to sell drugs on the street.
Louisville police say the night of Taylor's death, the officers knocked several times and announced their presence before entering. And when they did, they were met by gunfire from Walker, a licensed gun owner. Defense attorneys for Walker say he fired in self-defense, claiming police did not announce themselves. They say Walker thought the officers were breaking in.
They did not identify themselves and that they were in plain clothes.
And now the Commonwealth Attorney's Office is calling for Kentucky's Attorney General to appoint a special prosecutor.
It has been more than 2 months with no statement from the public to the public regarding this incident. We call for an independent investigation into her death.
Kentucky's governor calls the case troubling. He's asking state officials to review the findings of the police investigation. Walker shot 1 officer in the leg and has been charged with first-degree assault and attempted murder of a police officer. Taylor's family says she was on the front lines fighting the coronavirus at the time of her death. They were concerned about her getting sick, not shot.
They were concerned about her getting sick, not shot. Just think about this for 1 second, everybody. Black people are dying at rates of 3, 4, 5 times their populations in states all across the United States, and dying at rates 3 or 4 times their population in countries all over the globe. And for somebody in the middle of a pandemic to be a frontline worker, risking her life by sheer virtue of being in contact with coronavirus patients, and then having to be murdered by police in her own home while she's sleeping? This is the definition of living in America. If you are a black person, you are dealing with levels of violence and trauma inflicted mentally and literally inflicted physically with force, deadly force. This is what it is like for every black person in the United States, every black person anywhere on the planet knows at any time that their life can be taken by police or by some white person who would do damage, end their lives, do damage to family, do damage to untold dozens and dozens of people that person they killed knew, their family, their friends. This is what it is like. A 26-year-old woman isn't even allowed to live. No matter what Breonna Taylor's profession was, no matter what her resume, no matter what she did, no matter who she loved, Breonna Taylor should still be here with us. Black women's lives matter. Black women must be respected. The lives of black women must be respected. Breonna Taylor must be respected. And what should definitely happen now are immediate arrests of these 3 police officers, or I would call them executioners. And they must be fired from the force, arrested, and charged with the murder of Breonna Taylor. That report I just played to you is from ABC News from last month, May of this year, 2020. And still, even beyond that report, we have not heard any public statements from the police department. As a matter of fact, what we do know is that state and federal officials will be looking into this murder of Breonna Taylor. As you heard in that report, police shot 20 times. 20 rounds they shot into that home while after they broke in, and they shot blindly. This is an outrage. This is why you're seeing people on the streets of Louisville. George Floyd is front and center. And while his death was obviously a lynching and the most grotesque kind of thing you could expect to see, there have been so many people over the last few weeks and prior to last month and last week and yesterday who have been killed by police. Some of them were caught on cell phone video, some of them were not. Breonna Taylor's fell into the latter category. Or does this go deeper than her death was not caught by a cell phone? Is that the way we're going to frame this, by the way? Are we going to frame this as, well, her death was not caught on video. Her assassination wasn't caught on video. Her execution wasn't caught on video, so we don't give that as much coverage nationally in this country? Is that what a psychopathic and sociopathic society says to itself? Is that the kind of conversation? Is that the framework and the rubric of the kind of conversation that a psychopathic and sociopathic society would have? Whether somebody's murder was not on video versus whether someone's was? Is that where we've come to in America? Breonna Taylor had every right to live, as did George Floyd, as did Ahmaud Arbery, as did Sean Reed, as did David McAtee. This isn't about videos and not videos. We've all known that this happens to black people on a daily basis, an hourly basis. Maybe there were some white people who weren't aware of this, but they are certainly aware now. I think one of the reasons you've seen so many people in the streets is not just because of they've seen this video, which is obviously a snuff film and a clear case of lynching of George Floyd. But I also think it's because there's a younger generation out here who is fed up of an older generation failing it. There is a young generation out here that has a movement of its own and is taking things into its own hands to demand justice. I do believe, as I said in yesterday's episode, that these movements, whether it was the climate movement, the movement for ending gun violence, the movements for dealing with Occupy Wall Street, the movements for dealing with the misogyny and the sexism propounded at women just continuously experienced by women. This sexism that is hallmark to this society. These movements over the last few years have primarily been helmed and led by younger people. And granted, while there are older people and baby boomers in particular who join in to these protests, it is really younger people who are framing the conversation, who are leading these movements. And I think that bodes well, because with the way we have seen people in the streets these last 8 days plus shows you that this younger generation is not taking no for an answer. We need to start exalting these youth and supporting these youth who are spearheading these new movements. We need to make sure that Breonna Taylor's name is mentioned every day and often daily. Breonna Taylor deserves far more coverage. And if the national media is not going to do it, make sure you do it. Make sure you go on social media and say that we need justice for Breonna Taylor. Make sure that you contact the 2 senators in the state of Kentucky where this execution happened. Make sure you call them. Rand Paul, who I've mentioned earlier in this episode here. And of course, Mitch McConnell, who, by the way, is in a Senate race this coming November against Amy McGrath, who is a Democrat who is looking to take his seat, and there's a really good possibility that she could do so. You need to call 202-225-3121 and ask to speak to Mitch McConnell and Senator Rand Paul. Tell them to demand justice in the case of Breonna Taylor, her assassination, her execution. Make sure that they hear you. Leave a message on the voicemail if it's a voicemail or if it's an aide or a staffer, make sure that you speak to them and don't be rude to them. Be passionate, express your frustration and your anger, but do not be rude and do not engage in personal attacks. Notice I didn't even attack Mitch McConnell, which for me takes a lot of restraint. We want justice for Breonna Taylor. And for those of you listening who care about justice for all and not justice for a few, then I really do ask you, please, to call that number that I just gave out for Congress to speak to these two senators, Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, 202-225-3121. I would also call the governor's office in Kentucky. That number I do not have, but you can easily find it. You can do a search, Governor of Kentucky, and you'll be able to get the phone number. You'll be able to get the website. You'll be able to go on Twitter. I'm sure that the governor of Kentucky, and his name is, well, I do have his name now, is as, I believe is Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, Democratic governor, who, by the way, was an effigy of him was strung up on a tree by a white man a couple of weeks ago, and that white man was fired from his job for doing that. So I guarantee you that you can contact these individuals. You can definitely contact the governor of the state of Kentucky. You really should. And ask him to push and put pressure on the authorities. Now, look, as I said, in the state of Kentucky, there are going to be probes by both the feds and state. There needs to be a special prosecutor. I definitely agree with that sentiment. This is a case that needs to have more light on it. And it really should be put on this case, because this is a clear execution of a woman who was sleeping, for goodness sakes. This cannot go unpunished. And by the way, his name, the governor's name, is Andy Beshear. So let me correct that. Andy Beshear is the governor of Kentucky, a Democrat. His last name is spelled B as in boy, E, S as in Sam, H-E-A-R. Andy Beshear. Andy Beshear is the governor, and he must be contacted. He's on Twitter as well. You can find him on Twitter. He needs to be contacted. The pressure needs to be put on, and that's why you're seeing people in the streets, as I said, in Louisville. This is not only about George Floyd. This is about all of the black people, and for that matter, brown people and Native Americans who have been murdered by police here in this country. And this is also about a system. We aren't just asking for justice for George Floyd. What we are also asking for is justice for all of these individuals, including Breonna Taylor. And what we are also asking for is a complete change. We want a completely new system. And I've talked about this in previous episodes, where policing is more based upon the European model of community policing, of tending to your problems and listening to you, and not resolving problems with force, meaning not resolving problems with a gun or a taser. 6 Atlanta cops, by the way, let me remind you, in case you didn't know, were fired from their jobs as cops after the widely widely seen tasing video of two black college students. Tased in their own car on Sunday, I think it was. Now, if Atlanta could get rid of 6 brutal cops on the spot, then why hasn't Louisville got rid of these 3 cops who murdered a woman in her own bed? For the record, Louisville Metro Police, which is the same police who killed Breonna Taylor, as I said, killed David McAtee, a man who would feed the police for free. He was a businessman. He would feed them every day, free of charge. And during a protest on Monday morning, early hours of Monday morning, June 1st of this year, in Louisville, David McAtee was shot by police a number of times. The same police he fed daily. And once more, his body was left in the street for over 15 hours. The police who murdered him did not have their body cameras turned on, as they were required to do. In fact, the police who murdered Breonna Taylor did not have their body cameras on. And it was after that murder the mayor and police chief had required them to do so. And then when it was found out that the officers who killed David McAtee did not have their cameras turned on, turned out that the Louisville mayor fired the police chief of the Louisville Metro Police Department. He fired him on the spot when that revelation came, that the officers who killed David McAtee did not have their body cameras on, violating the promise that the chief had already made. And so that was a good first step. But how come the police chief is gone, but the 3 murderers are still employed by the Louisville Metro Police? How is the chief gone and these 3 murderers still on the force? Unless somebody listening knows something that I don't, none of these men has been charged, just like none of the other 3 who murdered George Floyd have been charged. We need justice. We need a completely different way of doing things. Policing in this country has long been a failure. It is part of what the system was designed to do. This is the kind of thing that breaks the hearts of anybody who cares. Breonna Taylor should still be here. You and I both know it. You and I both know that. You and I know that Breonna Taylor should still be alive and well. You and I both know that this should never, ever have happened. You and I both know that had Breonna Taylor been Barbara Williams or Barbara McIntyre or Barbara Ravenelli, that she would still be alive right now. I don't think that is rocket science. I don't think that that is pie in the sky. I think we all know that that is the truth in America and elsewhere. We all know that that is the truth. What happened to Breonna Taylor should never, ever have happened. You know it. I know it. Breonna Taylor was 26 years old. Breonna Taylor should still be here with us. Make no mistake, Black women's lives matter. And that must be emphasized, especially now, especially always.
Breonna loved life, and she loved to help people, and she loved a family. She didn't deserve what they did to her.